Sometimes, love shows up in the most impossible places, like on the edge of a river where a dying lioness does the unthinkable, protects the very animal she was born to hunt. This is not a story about survival. It's about something far deeper, a choice that broke every law of the wild, a bond that no one believed could exist, and a final sacrifice that will stay with you long after the sun sets on the savannah. If you've ever wondered how far love can truly go, stay. This story was meant for you. The fire had passed, but its breath still lingered in the air, dry, bitter, and heavy with the scent of things that would never grow again. Grace moved slowly across the scorched plains of the Okavango, her paws sinking softly into the warm ashes, her breath shallow. At 18 years old, the lioness was past her prime by any standard. Once she had roared across these lands with strength and purpose. Now her joints burned with every step, and her muscles, once firm and taut, trembled beneath her weathered frame. Her pride was gone. She had outlived 2 of them. Cubs, sisters, mates, all lost to the passage of time, battles fought, and seasons that showed no mercy. Grace had not hunted in days. Her last kill had been a desperate one, a wounded hare that took her nearly an hour to catch. There was no more glory left in her, just the stubborn will to stay alive. The fire had torn through the grasslands like a vengeful spirit. She hadn't run from it. She couldn't. She had waited it out in a muddy hole near a dried-up waterbed, breathing in the heat and the smoke, listening to the frantic cries of birds and animals. When it was over, what remained was silence, an eerie, mournful quiet that pressed against her ears like cotton. It was in that silence that she heard the sound. It wasn't loud, barely more than a wheeze, but it didn't belong to the wind or the charred earth. Grace lifted her head. Her ears twitched, still clogged with soot, but they caught it again, a soft, trembling bleat. Not the warning cry of an adult, not the fleeing thump of prey, but something else. Something small, helpless. Drawn by instinct, or perhaps something older and deeper, Grace turned toward the noise. Her body resisted, but she moved anyway. The sound led her to a burnt tree, hollow at the base, its roots half exposed by fire. There, huddled beneath the curve of scorched wood, lay a creature she never expected to see alive, a baby impala. No older than a day or 2, its legs were still unsteady beneath its body. Patches of blood and birth fluid clung to its fur, now matted with ash. Its ears flicked weakly, and its dark eyes, wide, glassy, unfocused, stared into the void where its mother should have been. The fire had taken her. That much was clear. Perhaps she had tried to protect her young. Perhaps she had simply run too late. Grace stood motionless. Every fiber of her being whispered the truth. This was prey. She hadn't eaten properly in nearly a week. Her ribs ached from emptiness. Her mouth watered involuntarily, and yet she didn't lunge. She didn't growl or stalk. She simply watched. The impala made a pitiful sound, barely more than a hiccup, and tried to stand. Its legs buckled. Again it tried. Fell, whimpered. Boy. Grace took a single step forward. The tiny creature froze. It tilted its head up, locking eyes with the predator towering over it. There was no fear in that look, only exhaustion and need. Something inside Grace moved, an old, aching feeling she thought had died seasons ago. She had raised 5 cubs in her life. 3 had lived long enough to leave her side. The last had died 2 years back, torn apart by hyenas when Grace couldn't reach him in time. Since then, she'd been empty. Her body had continued, but her heart had hollowed out, piece by piece, like termite-chewed wood. The impala blinked slowly. It made a sound again, a soft, broken call that didn't belong on the savannah. It was too gentle, too fragile. Grace stepped forward and lowered her head. The cubs she had birthed had all smelled of milk and blood. This one didn't. It smelled like smoke and fear. Still, she leaned in and gently ran her tongue across its flank, licking away the soot in a slow, deliberate motion. The Impala flinched, then stilled, as if it understood something vital was happening. Minutes passed like hours. Grace curled her body slightly around the trembling creature. She didn't understand why. She only knew she had to. She lay there in the ashes, her body curled around prey she should have killed, eyes half closed, breathing shallow but steady. The Impala pressed itself closer, too tired to question safety, too young to know what trust meant. Night fell early over the ruined plain. The stars blinked awake, indifferent to what stirred below. But somewhere not far from them, hidden behind a cluster of thorn trees, another pair of eyes watched, yellow, hungry, patient, and it remembered her scent. Morning brought little warmth. The sun crept slowly over the rim of the horizon, casting long shadows across the burned plain. Grace hadn't slept. Her body ached in places she hadn't felt in years, but she remained curled around the Impala fawn like a stone guardian. Sometime before dawn, the little one had fallen asleep with its nose tucked against her chest, its breath soft and rhythmic, a fragile melody against the silence of ruin. She should have left it. Everything about this decision went against what the wild demanded. She was a lioness, an apex predator, designed by nature to take life, not preserve it. This fawn, this Impala, was born to run from her, not rest beside her. And yet here they were, two broken things sharing what was left of the world. The cub, no, not a cub, she corrected herself, Jamie. The name had come to her in the stillness before sunrise. She didn't know why, only that it felt right. Jamie. It rolled through her mind like a smooth stone in a river. He stirred, blinked once, then looked up at her without fear. His ears twitched at the slightest movement, but he stayed close. Grace shifted, feeling the stiff pull of her old wounds. Her left shoulder throbbed from an old bite, years ago, defending her last cub. The ache never quite left her anymore. But now there was something deeper pushing through the pain, a reason to move again. She rose slowly, careful not to startle him. Jamie tried to follow, wobbled on his legs, and nearly fell face first into the ash. Grace nudged him gently upright with her muzzle. They couldn't stay here. The fire had emptied this region of cover, prey, and fresh water. The predators who roamed the edges, hyenas, wild dogs, and lions, not her own, would soon return, scavenging whatever they could find. If they found Jamie beside her, they wouldn't hesitate. She would be seen as weak, or worse, a traitor to her kind. But she knew of a place. Far south, past the thorn scrub and through the fractured hills, lay the outer rim of the Kumaga Reserve. It wasn't safe, not entirely, but it was home to migrating herds, shaded waterholes, and fewer threats. If she could get Jamie there, he might find others of his kind. He might survive. The distance was over 60 miles. For a young Impala barely able to stand, and for an old lioness dragging arthritis through every step, it might as well have been 1,000. But Grace had made her choice. She didn't decide to protect him. That had already happened. She decided to carry him through it. The journey began without ceremony. No clouds parted. No music swelled. Just two figures, one towering and battered, the other fragile and unsure, moving across an endless sea of ash. By midday, the heat rose heavy from the ground. Grace led with slow, measured steps, choosing terrain that wouldn't slice Jamie's hooves or tangle in his trembling legs. They passed blackened tree stumps and the scorched remains of antelope carcasses too far gone to draw scavengers. Jamie stayed close, never straying more than a few steps from her flank. At one point, a shadow moved above them, an old martial eagle circling lazily. Jamie flinched, instinct kicking in. Grace stopped, raised her head, and let out a low, guttural growl. Not loud, but pointed. The eagle veered off. Jamie's eyes widened. "Watch the sky," she seemed to say. "The danger comes from everywhere." They found a shallow stream near dusk, a muddy trickle no wider than her paw. Jamie drank greedily, while Grace watched the tree line. The wind carried the scent of dust, and something else, distant, familiar, predator. Later that night, as they rested under the cover of a half-fallen baobab, Jamie lay beside her, legs tucked in neatly. Grace curled slightly around him, instinct returning like muscle memory. He twitched in his sleep, and she licked his ear once, a habit she hadn't practiced in years. But even as she settled into that quiet rhythm, her mind remained alert. She had made an unnatural choice, one that wouldn't be forgiven by the wild. Predators that spared prey were outcasts, weak, mad, and in the wilderness, madness was often fatal. As the stars blinked to life overhead, Grace closed her eyes, but only halfway. Something in the back of her mind prickled. She could feel it. They were being watched. The first sign came with the wind. Grace felt it before she smelled it, a subtle shift in the air, a tightening along her spine that had nothing to do with age or injury. Experience had taught her to trust that feeling. It was the same instinct that once warned her of ambushes, of rival prides, of danger long before it revealed itself. She slowed her pace. Jamie noticed immediately. He had begun to learn her rhythms, the way her body spoke when words were unnecessary. When Grace stopped, Jamie stopped. When she lifted her head and stared into the tall grass, Jamie froze, his legs stiff, his small chest rising and falling too fast. The scent arrived moments later. Hyena. Not fresh, not close, but unmistakable. Grace's jaw tightened. Hyenas had shaped the worst chapters of her life. They were scavengers, yes, but also relentless hunters when the opportunity arose. Clever, patient, and they remembered, especially one of them. Varro. She had not seen him in years, but his presence still lived in her memory like an old wound that never healed properly. He had been younger then, leaner, hungry for dominance. It was Varro who had led the pack that killed her youngest cub. Grace had arrived too late, her roar scattering the hyenas, but leaving her with nothing but blood and silence. Hyenas did not forget victories. Grace moved again, this time angling their path slightly west, away from the open plains and toward a stretch of broken stone and brush. Jamie followed, stumbling once before regaining his footing. His legs were stronger now than they had been the day before, but they were still unsteady, still learning. As the sun climbed higher, the land changed. The ash thinned. Green shoots pushed tentatively through blackened soil, signs of life stubborn enough to survive fire. Grace paused near a cluster of rocks to rest, lowering herself carefully. Jamie curled against her side, pressing close, as if her warmth could shield him from more than just the heat. Grace closed her eyes but kept her ears alert. She thought of the choice she had made, not just to spare him, but to carry him forward, to place his life above her own survival. It was madness by the laws of the wild. But when she looked down at Jamie, at the way he leaned into her without fear, she felt something unfamiliar yet deeply right. Purpose. They moved again by late afternoon. The terrain grew uneven, forcing Jamie to watch his steps more carefully. At one point, he slipped between two rocks and cried out, a sharp, startled sound that echoed too loudly. Grace's head snapped up, her heart hammered. She pulled him free, gently, nudging him back to his feet. Jamie trembled, but stayed upright, eyes wide and ashamed, as if he had disappointed her. Grace nudged him again, firmer this time, encouraging him forward. "Quiet," her body seemed to say. "The world listens." They had gone no more than another mile when it happened. Jamie veered off the path slightly, curious about a patch of darker grass where the soil was damp. He sniffed at it, then stepped forward before Grace could stop him. The smell hit her instantly. Sharp, musky, marked. Hyena territory. Jamie froze, sensing her sudden tension. He lifted one hoof, uncertain, then set it down again, right in the center of the scent. Grace's breath caught. Far away, too far for Jamie to hear, a low sound rippled through the air. Not a laugh. Not yet. Just a presence acknowledging that something had crossed a line. Vero had found them. The rest of the afternoon passed under a heavy silence. Grace kept moving, increasing their pace despite the protest in her joints. Each step sent a dull ache through her legs, but she ignored it. Pain was familiar. Losing Jamie was not an option. As dusk approached, the land opened again, revealing a shallow ravine carved by old water. Grace led Jamie down into it, using the stone walls as cover. The air was cooler here, and the wind less revealing. They rested briefly. Jamie leaned into her side, exhausted but determined. Grace watched the sky darken, counting the seconds between distant bird calls. Night was coming, and with it the advantage. Hyenas preferred darkness. She knew they would not attack yet. Vero was patient. He would watch, measure, wait for weakness. Grace lowered her head to Jamie's and pressed her muzzle against his neck. He made a soft sound, a sound that was no longer quite Impala, no longer quite anything she recognized. A sound of belonging. As the first stars appeared, Grace lifted her head and stared into the darkness beyond the ravine. Somewhere out there, Vero was smiling, and he was closing the distance. The ravine held the chill of night long after the sky went black. Grace stayed awake, her body curled protectively around Jamie, her ears twitching at every rustle, every whisper of wind. She had spent a lifetime reading the language of silence, how it shifted when danger crept close. And tonight the silence was far too careful. Jamie slept lightly. Each time he stirred, Grace pressed her muzzle gently against his back, reminding him without words that she was still there. He had grown quieter, more alert, in just a few days. He moved with more control now. He watched her closely and mirrored her instincts. But he was still young, still vulnerable, and somewhere beyond the rim of the ravine, Vero was waiting. Grace didn't know how close he was now, but she knew hyenas. When they began to shadow prey, they left just enough space to remain invisible, but not enough to be forgotten. Vero was playing his game. Shortly after midnight, the sky shifted. A low fog rolled in, and with it came a change in the air, an electric stillness that made Grace lift her head. That's when she saw him. Not Vero, something smaller, slender, silent. A young leopard crouched on the ledge above them, partially hidden by scrub. His body was tense, but not in a stalking pose. His ears weren't pinned. His tail didn't flick. He was watching. Grace stood slowly, careful not to wake Jamie. The leopard's eyes met hers, unblinking. Young, maybe 2 years at most. Still lean from adolescence, but with a strength in his shoulders that told her he was no stranger to survival. He didn't move. Neither did she. Then, without sound, the leopard descended the slope, placing his paws with eerie precision until he stood 20 feet away. Too close. Too calm. Grace let out a low warning growl, not aggressive, but clear. The message, "This is my ground." But the leopard didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head and spoke. "You're the lioness traveling with prey," he said. His voice was quiet, almost curious. Grace didn't respond. Words between predators were rare and often dangerous. But the leopard didn't show threat, only interest. "They say you walk with a fawn," he continued, "that he follows you like a cub." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Who's they?" The leopard blinked once. "Birds, jackals. Everyone talks when something unnatural moves through the wild." He stepped closer, and Grace held her ground. "I'm not here to challenge you," he said. "My name is Aiden." Grace didn't relax, but she allowed him one more step. "You shouldn't be traveling this path," Aiden continued, "not with the scent you carry. Vero is following you. His pack spreads wider every day. He's closing in." She'd known this, but hearing it spoken aloud from a stranger's mouth sent a fresh pulse of urgency through her chest. "How far?" she asked. Aiden hesitated. "Close enough to taste your trail." Grace looked back at Jamie. He slept still, unaware that death had just circled them again. "We'll change course," she said. "No." Aiden shook his head. "That won't be enough. He's laid markers in every direction. You're walking into a funnel." Grace's tail flicked in frustration. "Then what do you suggest?" "There's a shortcut," Aiden said. "Old mining land. Abandoned. Dangerous. But it cuts days off your journey. No predator dares cross it. Not even hyenas." Grace stared at him, weighing the risk. Old mines meant twisted ground, human scent, possible traps. But if it meant staying ahead of Vero... She looked back at Jamie, then to Aiden. "You know the way?" "I do." "Then lead." Aiden nodded once and turned without a word, moving silently into the mist. Grace woke Jamie gently. He stirred with confusion but obeyed without question, staying close as they followed the leopard up the other side of the ravine. For the first time in days, Grace didn't lead. She followed a stranger into unknown terrain, into a shortcut that smelled of metal and dust, of things that had no place in the wild. As they climbed, Jamie leaned close to her. "What's that smell?" he whispered, eyes wide. Grace inhaled. It wasn't just metal, it was gunpowder. And something else, something colder, something human. The world changed at the ridge. The wild grasses thinned, replaced by jagged rocks and rust-colored dirt, littered with strange shapes that didn't belong. Metal poles bent at odd angles. Broken fences sank into the earth like bones of forgotten giants. The air was different here, still and wrong. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to move with hesitation. Grace paused at the edge, her nose twitching. Human. Not fresh, but not ancient either. The scent of oil, gunpowder, and something even more unnatural clung to the earth like mold. Her lip curled, not in fear, but in disgust. She had passed through human zones before, roads, fences, abandoned huts, but never this deep into one of their scars. Aiden didn't stop. The young leopard moved ahead, weaving through the rusted skeletons of what had once been machinery. Jamie stayed close to Grace's flank, his small hooves clinking softly on the old stone paths. The sound echoed too far in the silence. "What is this place?" he whispered. Grace didn't answer right away. Her eyes swept the ground, alert for traps. Then, low and flat, she said, "A place where nothing should grow." Decades ago, this had been a mining zone. She could smell the remnants of dynamite, metal filings, and long-cooled engine oil. The humans had dug deep into the earth, carving open its belly and leaving it to bleed. And when they left, they took nothing with them but the air. Aiden led them through a narrow passage where cliffs loomed high on either side. At the bottom, Broken wood and crumbled concrete told stories of old structures now swallowed by time. Grace hated every step of it. This land had no rules, no scent trails, no predators, no prey, only ghosts. They moved in silence until the path opened into a wide clearing. In the center lay a hulking mass, once an elephant, long dead, its skeleton stripped clean. Bits of hide clung to the cracked skull. Buzzards perched on nearby beams but didn't dare touch it. Jamie slowed, staring. What happened to it? Grace said nothing, but in her mind she saw it. Not death by hunger or battle. This was something else, something cleaner, colder. She had seen such wounds once, long ago, when humans had come to her old territory with rifles and smiles. They had left behind meat that no animal would touch. Jamie shivered and pressed closer. Aiden finally spoke. We're halfway through. This ground won't help you, but it'll confuse Vero. He won't track you here, not if he's smart. Grace gave him a long look. Vero isn't smart. He's stubborn. They pressed on Absian. The path narrowed again into a series of sharp turns, the ground uneven and slick with gravel. Jamie struggled to keep balance, his legs slipping. Grace slowed for him, offering her body as a brace each time he faltered. At one bend, the metallic scent grew sharper. Grace halted, ears pricked. Something nearby. Off. She stepped ahead cautiously and found it, an old steel trap, half buried under dirt. Its teeth rusted but still dangerous. She stared at it for a long moment, then growled low. Aiden doubled back, spotted it, and said quietly, "There are more. Stay close to me." Jamie didn't understand what it was, but he felt the weight of her stare and kept silent. As night fell, they came to a low tunnel, a collapsed drainage pipe barely wide enough for Grace. Aiden slipped through first, vanishing into shadow. Grace hesitated, looking up at the stars. She didn't like being in tight places. The last time she'd entered a space this small, she'd crawled in to give birth during a storm, only to crawl out alone. Jamie nuzzled her hind leg, waiting. She exhaled and followed. Inside, it was damp and cold. Jamie's hooves clacked on the metal, sharp and hollow. Grace moved slowly, every muscle tense. Halfway through, Jamie slipped again, his leg wedged between two stones. He cried out. Not loud, but enough. Grace turned fast, her heart pounding. She nudged his leg gently, then pressed with her paw. Jamie winced, but didn't panic. He stayed still, trusting her. The stone shifted. His leg came free. He looked up at her, eyes wide. "Sorry," he whispered. Grace bent down and licked the top of his head, not because he was weak, but because he hadn't been. They emerged on the other side into night air thick with humidity. The scent of wild returned, trees, earth, prey, life. But behind it, a whisper. On the ridge above them, something moved, a silhouette too wide to be a leopard, too silent for a lion, and watching. The ridge offered no cover. The trees here were thin and wind-warped, their trunks bleached by sun and time. Rocks jutted out like bones from the earth, and the grass grew in patches, short, dry, brittle. It wasn't a place to rest, but it was the only path forward. Below, the Botetti River shimmered under the moonlight, wide and dark, its current fast from the rains that had passed weeks before. Grace scanned the open stretch ahead, her ears twitching. Too exposed, too quiet. Aiden stayed low, his body nearly flat against the slope as he sniffed the air. His tail flicked once. "They're here," he said quietly. "More than before. I count at least 5. Grace didn't respond. She already knew. The scent was undeniable now, strong, layered, fresh. Hyena. And not just any pack. His pack. Vero's stench rode the breeze like a dare. Jamie stood between them, eyes wide, his legs trembling, but not from exhaustion. He felt it too. Fear. Not the fear of being chased or hunted, but the deeper kind. The kind that comes when you realize the thing chasing you knows who you are. "We need to move fast," Aiden whispered. "If we reach the lower slope before they box us in." But the words died in his throat. A sound rose behind them, a warbling, throaty call that slid into a full-throated cackle. Then another, and another. Hyenas. They weren't hiding anymore. Grace turned sharply, placing herself between Jamie and the direction of the sound. Aiden crouched beside her, his ears pinned back. "Vero likes drama," Aiden muttered. "He doesn't just kill, he performs." Grace bared her teeth. "Let him come." The brush exploded. 7 hyenas emerged like smoke through dry grass, teeth gleaming, bodies rippling with muscle and hunger. They spread wide, forming a crescent around the 3 travelers. Vero stood at the center, his body scarred and massive, with a dead stare that didn't blink. "Well," he said, voice low and mocking, "I thought it was a lie. The lioness who nurses prey." Grace didn't flinch. "He's not prey." Vero laughed. It was a short, humorless bark. "You've gone soft," he said. "I remember you. You roared louder once. Your cub screamed louder, too, before we silenced him." Jamie shuddered. Grace stepped forward, her body rising to full height. The fire in her chest ignited. "Leave now," she growled, "or I'll finish what I should have finished then." The hyenas laughed, all of them, a wall of sound that pierced the night. Then they charged. Grace didn't wait. She lunged forward, straight into the oncoming wave. Her joints screamed with every movement, but she pushed through the pain. Her claws met flesh, her teeth tore into a shoulder, and the first hyena yelped as it staggered back. Aiden dove to the right, slamming into a smaller attacker, spinning it down the slope. Dust rose. Jamie backed toward the rock face, trying to stay small, still. Invisible, just as Grace had taught him. But the pack was coordinated. 2 hyenas peeled away from the chaos, flanking toward Jamie. Grace saw them. She turned, but not in time. Aiden did. With a burst of speed, the young leopard intercepted them, clawing one across the face. The second rammed into him, jaws snapping. They tumbled, teeth and claws, and fury. Grace tore herself from the fight and leapt. Her body crashed into the 3rd hyena, the one lunging for Jamie's throat. They rolled, teeth flashing, until she landed on top. She bit down hard. Crunch. The hyena stopped moving, but the others were closing again. Aiden was on the ground now, one leg bleeding heavily. He snarled, still fighting, but slower. Grace looked at Jamie, shaking, crying silently, but still tucked against the rocks. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her breath came ragged. Her body was fading, but not her will. Never that. She rose again, ready to charge. A sudden howl cut through the night. It didn't come from the ridge. It came from the river, from below. The howl rose from the riverbed like a haunting memory, a deep, rolling call that didn't belong to any predator Grace knew. It wasn't from the hyenas. It wasn't from Aiden. It came from the wild itself, as if the land had finally decided to speak. The sound startled the hyenas just long enough for her to act. "Run," she growled, eyes locked on Jamie. He didn't move. "I said run." But Jamie stayed frozen, his hooves dug into the dirt, his breathing ragged. He couldn't leave her, not like this, not now. Aiden struggled to his feet nearby, one leg dragging behind him, blood painting his spotted flank. He limped toward Jamie, swaying. "I'll take him," he rasped. Grace met his eyes. There was no time for thanks, only trust. Another hyena charged, teeth bared, eyes wild. Grace met it head on. They crashed into each other, rolling dangerously close to the river's edge. Her old bones screamed with the impact, but she didn't stop. She bit, clawed, drove the creature back with everything she had left. Behind her, Aiden grabbed Jamie by the nape like a cub and dragged him toward the slope. The river thundered below. Grace turned. Vero stood at the edge now, watching her. His face was calm, unreadable. "You've ruined something pure," he said. "Predator and prey, you broke the law." Grace limped backward, placing herself between Jamie and the alpha once more. "No," she said, "I changed it." Vero lunged. She braced for impact, but twisted at the last second, using his own weight to send him skidding down the incline. "Go!" she roared. Aiden didn't hesitate. He nudged Jamie hard, and they disappeared down the narrow path toward the river. Vero recovered fast, too fast. He charged again. Grace didn't have another fight in her. So she did the only thing left. She ran. Not away, from him. Toward the river. The slope was brutal, loose with gravel, treacherous with sharp stones. But she ran anyway. Her joints screamed. Her lungs burned. Every step felt like tearing through fire. She spotted them near the bottom. Aiden slipping, Jamie stumbling beside him. The river roared ahead, swollen and dark. "Keep going!" she shouted, her voice hoarse with everything she still had to give. Jamie turned, eyes wide, heart breaking. "Mom." But she didn't let him finish. In one impossible motion, she grabbed him by the loose skin of his back and hurled her body forward into the river. The current took them instantly. The water was colder than she expected, stronger. It gripped them like claws, spinning, pulling, dragging. She held tight to Jamie, jaws clenched around his scruff. Her legs kicked furiously, but her left hind limb was useless now. The old wound had split open again. She couldn't feel anything below the knee. The current smashed them into a floating branch, then sucked them under and back up again. Jamie didn't struggle. He understood. He stayed still. She used the last of her strength to paddle toward the far bank, toward the reeds where the land rose again. Her vision blurred. Almost there. The shore loomed just ahead, 20 feet, maybe less. She pushed once, twice. A submerged log struck her side. Something cracked. She nearly let go, but then solid ground. Her front paws found mud. She heaved upward, dragged Jamie onto the shore with a guttural growl that was more pain than power. He rolled free beside her, gasping. She collapsed. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Jamie crawled to her side, his legs shaking, his small frame soaked and trembling. "You made it," she whispered. But her body said otherwise. The world around her dimmed. Still she heard it. In the distance, faint but growing louder, the pounding of hooves and the calls of zebras. The wind shifted. It carried the unmistakable scent of dust, grass, and something deeper. Life. Jamie lifted his head slowly, his small chest still rising and falling in jagged bursts. His ears twitched at the distant rhythm. Hoofbeats. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. He turned toward Grace. She was lying on her side, her breathing shallow, eyes half closed. Her fur was soaked, caked in mud and blood. One leg stretched at an unnatural angle. Still her eyes found him, and she smiled, not with her mouth, but with something softer, quieter, that lived behind her gaze. "They're close," she whispered. "Can you hear them?" Jamie nodded, though the sound frightened him. It felt too big, too real. He had dreamed of them, imagined their voices carried on the wind, but now they were here, and she was slipping away. "You have to go," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "I'm not leaving you," he answered, pressing his forehead into her chest. Her body was cool now, not cold, not yet, but close. Grace didn't move. "You're ready," she murmured. stronger than I ever was. You've learned to listen, to move like the wind, not just run from it." Tears blurred Jamie's vision. "Your mother. She gave you your beginning. I gave you the middle. Now it's your turn to finish it." The herd was closer now. Jamie could hear individual calls, stallions braying, foals chirping. He lifted his head toward the sound, then looked back at her. "I don't want to be alone." "You won't be," she said. "I'll be in the dust, in the river, in the wind. You'll feel me when you run." She reached her head forward with effort, touching her nose gently to his cheek. "And when they ask who you are, tell them about me." Jamie stayed beside her until the first shapes appeared on the ridge. Zebras. Hundreds of them, their black and white coats glowing in the early light. One broke away from the herd, moving with a kind of urgency that felt familiar. A mare, lean and sharp-eyed, her gait strong, but hesitant. She saw Jamie. He didn't move. She came closer, step by step, lowering her head to meet his. Behind her, the herd watched in silence. Jamie looked back one last time. Grace's eyes were closed now. Her chest had stilled. He pressed his muzzle to her side and lingered. Then he turned and walked toward the mare. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. When Jamie stepped beside her, she shifted her body ever so slightly, just enough to shelter him from the breeze, the same way Grace once had. As the herd began to move again, Jamie ran with them. His stride was uneven at first, but strong. He didn't look back. But as the wind pushed behind them, lifting the dry grass into little spirals of dust, he could almost hear it. A whisper, deep and low, curling around the sound of hoofbeats. Love never dies. Run, my boy. And in the distant hills, where the river curved like a scar, across the land, the wind carried the faintest echo of a lioness's roar, so soft it could have been memory, or the soul of the savannah breathing one final lullaby. Far above the herd, vultures circled, but they did not descend. Not yet. If this story moved something in you, just leave a word, or a single emoji, a heart, a name, a thought. Sometimes it only takes one quiet comment to let the world know these stories matter. And if you'd like to walk with us through more moments like this, of courage, of connection, of quiet love that changes everything, you're always welcome here. There are more stories waiting, and we'd love to share them with you.